The Lumix S1 Mark IIe is a very interesting camera, as in it's in the middle ground between the Lumix S1 Mark II and the Lumix S5 Mark IIX. It has a lot of great functions that the S1 Mark II has, but it doesn't seem like it's too different from the S5iiX either. So in this video, I'll be deep diving comparing both of these cameras, the Lumix S1 Mark IIe versus the Lumix S5 Mark IIX, and hopefully help you guys answer the question, which one of these two cameras you should buy, or if the S1 IIe is worth the upgrade. And spoilers, it most likely isn't. The first thing we do need to touch point on is going to be the price point of these two cameras. The S5 Mark IIX is going to be coming in right now, currently at $2,000, but at the launch price, it was $2,200 here in the US. Meanwhile, the S1 Mark IIe is going to be coming in at $2,499, or basically $2,500 here in the US. Granted, the S5iiX has been out on the market a little bit longer, so you're more likely to be able to pick up one of these bodies on used or in good condition on the market versus the S1 IIe has only been out for a few months now. Diving into the first thing that I want to touch point between these two cameras is going to be the physical build, because that's the biggest and most drastic difference between both these cameras. Both these cameras, I would say the S5iiX is sort of that actual hybrid camera where it has your flip out screen versus what I would call a more versatile hybrid camera. This has a little bit more of a professional style build overall, being able to have that tilt-free screen. You have individual ports, so all of your things don't have to be open at the same time, so you don't have to have your mic and your headphone jack being open. You can have just your mic jack be open if you are plugging something in. You have your individual photo, video, and S&Q switches, so you can actually quickly switch over to your photo mode or your video mode by one simple switch, and then everything can be customized for shooting on photos versus shooting on video. You do have that one CF Express Type B and one SD card slot versus two SD card slots on the S5iiX. Both these cameras do have the exact same sensor, being a 24.2 megapixel sensor on both these cameras, but the S1 IIe just has a little bit more of that premium body at the end of the day. You know, things with your front record button, having a dedicated lock switch, having front and rear tally lights as a slightly deeper grip on the handle itself, and also having that closed shutter on the inside of the camera, kind of making sure whenever you are changing lenses that your sensor is completely covered. So even though both these cameras are considered hybrid cameras at the end of the day, I would say the S1 IIe kind of has more of that premium hybrid body, while the S5iiX is more of the common hybrid body that most of us are used to. Moving on to video specs, both these cameras have a lot of similarities. Things like shooting 6K open gate up to 30 frames a second. In 4K, you're in 48 or 60 frames a second. You do have a Super 35 or an APS-C 1.5x crop on both of them. Things like 1080, 120 frames a second, and different shooting modes like that. Now, one thing that the S1 IIe specifically is able to do is being able to shoot in 6K 2:4:1 aspect ratio up to 60 frames a second. What this means is you're actually shooting the full width of your entire sensor, but not entirely the full height, so the top and the bottom is cropped in. In practice though, what that means is if you are shooting on a 4K 16:9 timeline, if you shoot in a 2:4:1 aspect ratio in 60 or 48 frames a second, it's only gonna be a 1.3x crop instead of a 1.5x crop like shooting in 4K 60 or 48 frames a second. Granted, if you are on a 2:1 aspect ratio timeline, what typically YouTube recommends, because it's using the entire real estate of someone's phone and not cutting off the bars like this video right now is doing, then you are going to be actually getting a 1.1x crop on your ratio instead of a 1.3x crop in comparison to a 16:9 timeline. Now, the other thing that the S1 IIe also can do is being able to shoot ProRes RAW internally, and because it's using a CF Express Type B card, you actually have a completely weather sealed camera, having been able to record ProRes RAW 5.8K up to 30 frames a second, or being able to shoot in 4K ProRes RAW up to 60 frames a second. And then the last thing that the S5iiX has over, at least currently as I'm recording this video, the S1 IIe, is the ability to actually record 3.8K MP4 Lite, just an open gate MP4 Lite version that is a small file size, which I'm actually using for this video right now. So currently the S5iiX only has that, but I assume the S1 Mark II series cameras will eventually get it later down the road. Nextly, it's going to be diving into the video assist tools that both these cameras have, which is a wide range of selection that Lumix cameras just offer in general. Things like proxy support, being able to use camera to cloud, real-time LUT, the Lumix Lab app, all the other Lumix magic sauce like electronic stabilization, shutter angle, multiple frame markers, and different things like that. A couple extra tools that the Lumix S1 Mark IIe does have over the S5 iiX is things like false color, which I'm a huge fan of. Hopefully there might be one day the S5 iiX gets in a firmware update, but I can easily see Lumix keeping that for more of the higher end professional cameras. Also cropless stabilization, being able to use electronic stabilization, but not cropping into your images if you're using Lumix native lenses. And then also Bluetooth timecode sync and different things like that. In terms of audio, if you do buy the XLR2, which I believe is $500 now, maybe even $600 here in the States, it is going to be giving you 32-bit flow internally on your MOV files, which is actually pretty cool that you can get 32-bit flow internally on a camera like this. Meanwhile, the XLR2 does work on the S5 iiX, but it's not giving you 32-bit flow audio. It's only going to be giving you 24-bit audio due just to hardware limitations inside this camera. Moving on to the color science, both these images produce really nice, pleasing images. I will have to say the Vlog color profile on the S1 Mark IIe camera produces just a slightly softer, more natural looking image versus the S5 iiX has a little bit more digital sharpness than I prefer, and I do like the overall image quality on the S1 Mark IIe. And also via paid upgrade, you can also get Log C3 in the S1 Mark IIe for another $200. The last thing I want to touch point on in terms of image quality is going to be the dynamic range. On the S1 Mark IIe, you can get up to 14 stops of dynamic range, and then on the S5 iiX, it's only going to be getting up to 12 stops of dynamic range. Moving on to autofocus, both these cameras have really great autofocus and work really fast. Granted, it does take a learning curve to learn how to use Lumix autofocus. If you are interested, I have an entire video talking about that right there. Before moving to the cons, let's talk about the stabilization. Both these cameras do have 5 axes of stabilization. On the S5 iiX, you do have 6.5 stops. Meanwhile, on the S1 Mark IIe, it's going to be 8 stops of stabilization. Main difference really when you're looking at this is basically both these have really good stabilization, and you're not going to be noticing much of a difference between either model. One thing that I do want to note on the S1 Mark IIe again is the ability to have cropless electronic stabilization. On the S5 Mark IIX, all you have is standard stabilization, which crops in about 1.1x on both these cameras, and then you have high stabilization, which is roughly a 1.44x crop on both these cameras. The cropless electronic stabilization again only works for Lumix lenses on this camera, but it gives you electronic stabilization on top of your IBIS, making it look super smooth and great for kind of wide angle lenses. Nextly, let's move on to cons, starting with the S5 iiX. In all honesty, I don't have a ton of cons for what is inside this camera in terms of the capabilities. The only few cons I do still have that I hope is all fixable via a firmware update is when you are recording your audio, it records 4 tracks of audio no matter what. Even if you don't have an XLR plugged in, even if you're in stereo or mono, it's going to record all 4 tracks. So when you throw it into your timeline, you have to delete the 3 or 2 of those tracks if they're not being utilized. The other con that I still have that I completely forgot this was an issue on the Lumix S5 Mark II cameras is when you're using an HDMI monitor and you want info display on your monitor, it completely removes the info display on the back of your screen. So you either have your info display on your monitor or on your screen. It would be really nice, again, via a firmware update, I can imagine this not being too difficult, to have the information display be both on this monitor and also on your HDMI monitor would be really nice. Now moving on to the S1 Mark IIe for the cons, which there are a few more. And the first one, sadly, is overheating. I think just this body design for the S1 Mark II cameras have just a couple little flaws inside them. Some of the first ones being that because of this tilt-free screen not being popped out just a little bit more like this means that there's not as much airflow from the sensor to the back of the camera. And the second thing is CF Express Type B cards are known to heat up a lot faster and there's not as much airflow. Granted, before I say some of my overheating experiences on this camera specifically, I do want to know if you're using an SD card, I don't necessarily think it's purely comes down to the heat around the camera or what's producing the heat on the camera itself. I think it goes even a little bit deeper than that, but I'm not 100% sure because I'm not an engineer at the end of the day. I have used and tested this camera in 6K 24 frames a second, 32-bit flow audio, running HDMI, in a 90-degree or 33 Celsius studio. So it was pretty hot and I was sweating and the camera had an internal battery, it was SD card. The settings were set to auto 1 and high thermal management, which I just personally recommend with these cameras to get the best results out of this camera. And the battery ended up dying. The camera died with 0 overheating warning symbols whatsoever. So that alone kind of told me, okay, I don't necessarily think it's a heat related issue, not as much as a sun related issue, if that makes any sense. All I do know is that the camera did overheat in 75-degree weather, which is a lot cooler, around 22 to 25 minutes when the camera shut down to need to cool off. Okay, so the camera overheated. It's only been like 20 minutes, bro. That's the S1iiE. So my final thoughts between both these cameras. Personally speaking, I think if for any way there was a way to have the S1 Mark IIe at least have 4K 48 frames a second, even with a 10-minute record limit, to allow people to use the full sensor's width and height, it would make this camera feel like it makes a little bit more sense to have either a worthy of an upgrade or just have as your A camera and have an S5 II or 2X as your B camera, if it allowed you to even record 4K 48 or 60 frames a second in the full frame, full sensor, full width, full height. Even if it was with a 10-minute record limit, would make this camera, I feel like, make just a little bit more sense. But otherwise, I do still prefer the S1 Mark IIe body style, the design, the switches, the tilt-free screen. The entire design of this camera is really, really nice. I think if Lumix can figure out some way to have some firmware update to improve or just eliminate the overheating issues on the S1 Mark II cameras, then this camera is going to make a lot more sense for people to be able to record ProRes RAW internally, have it be completely weather sealed, or just prefer and enjoy this body design, which is a lot nicer in my personal opinion than the S5 IIX. So which camera should you buy? Well, if you're upgrading from the S5 IIX, I don't think you need to buy the S1 Mark IIe in all honesty. I would save the money, get the S1 Mark II if you're interested in it, but I feel like the S5 IIX in terms of the quality, the specs, what you're getting now of this camera is so similar to the S1 Mark IIe, and it doesn't necessarily make as much of a sense to upgrade from the S5 IIX to the S1 Mark IIe. And then if you had to pick between the S5 IIX or the S1 Mark IIe, which one I would personally go with would again be the S5 IIX. This is just a bulletproof camera. It gets the job done. It looks clean with the blackout design. Everything about this camera is functional and it's an extremely bulletproof camera. Well, not literally, but it is really capable and it's super reliable. For most people, I'm gonna probably suggest the S5 IIX or even the S5 II because this camera just makes more practical sense in a lot of different ways. Anyways, if you guys have any specific questions between these two cameras, just let me know them down in the comments down below. And if you are interested in seeing a video about the S1 Mark II versus the S5 IIX, well, check out that video right there. YouTube recommends you might like this video right here. Until next one, guys, peace.